Black Beauty by Sewell. Chapter 9. Now I had lived in this happy place 3 years, but sad changes were about to come soon. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. The doctor was often at the house, and the master looked grave and anxious. Then we heard that she must leave her home at once and go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. The news fell upon the household like the tolling of a death bell. Everybody was sorry, and the master started preparing for leaving England. The first of the party who went were Miss Jessie and Flora with their governess. They came to say good-bye. They hugged poor Merrylegs like an old friend, and so indeed he was. Then we heard what had been arranged for us. Master had sold Ginger and me to his old friend, for he thought we should have a good place there. He had given Merrylegs to the vicar, who wanted a pony for Mrs. Blomfield. Joe was to take care of him and to help in the house, so I thought that Merrylegs was well off. John had the offer of several good places, but he said he should wait a little and look around. The evening before they left, the master came into the stable to give some directions and to pat his horses for the last time. He was very sad. I knew that by his voice. We horses can tell more by the voice than many people can. "Have you decided what to do, John?" he said. "No, sir. But it will be the right thing for me to find the situation with some colt breaker and horse trainer. Many young animals are frightened and spoiled by wrong treatment. I always get on well with horses. What do you think of it, sir?" "You are the most suitable man for this," said master. "You understand horses, and they understand you. If in any way I can help you, write to me. I shall speak to my agent in London and leave your character with him." Master gave John the name and address, and then he thanked him for his long and faithful service. But that was too much for John. "You and my dear mistress have done so much for me that I shall never repay it. We shall never forget you, sir, and some day we shall see mistress in good health again. We should not lose hope, sir." Master gave John his hand, but he didn't speak, and they both left the stable. The last sad day came. The footman and the heavy luggage had gone off the day before. There was only master and mistress and her maid. Ginger and I brought the carriage up to the hall door for the last time. Master placed mistress carefully in the carriage, and the servants stood round crying. "Good-bye," he said. "We shall not forget any of you." And he got in. "Drive on, John." Joe jumped up, and we trotted slowly through the park and through the village, where the people were standing at their doors to have a last look and to say God bless them. When we reached the railway station, I think mistress walked from the carriage to the waiting room. I heard her say in her own sweet voice, "Good-bye, John. God bless you." But John made no answer. Perhaps he could not speak. Joe took the things out of the carriage, and John called him to stay with the horses, while he went on to the platform. Poor Joe! He couldn't hide his tears. Very soon the train came puffing up into the station, and in 2 or 3 minutes glided away. When it was quite out of sight, John came back. "We shall never see her again," he said. "Never." He took the reins and with Joe drove slowly home. But it was not our home now. Chapter 10. The next morning after breakfast, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress' low chaise to take him to the vicarage. But first He came to say goodbye to us. Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earlshall Park, where the Earl lived. There was a very fine house. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man. He was very friendly and polite to John, and he called a groom to take us to our boxes, and after that invited John to take some refreshment. They took us to a light and airy stable. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York, who was to be our new coachman, came in to see us. After looking carefully at both of us, he said, "Mr. Manley, I can see no fault in these horses, but we know that horses, like men, have their peculiarities and different treatment. What about these two horses? Do they have any peculiarities?" "Well," said John, "they are the best pair of horses in this country, but they are not alike. The black one has the most perfect temper I ever knew. I suppose he has never known a hard word or a blow. All his pleasure is to do what you wish. As for the chestnut, I fancy she had bad treatment. She came to us snappish and suspicious, but when she found what kind of place ours was, it all disappeared. If you treat her well, there is not a better, more willing animal than she is, but she is more irritable than the black horse." "Of course," said York, "I understand. But all the grooms cannot be just what they should be. I'll remember what you said about the mare." The next day Lord W. came to look at us. He was pleased with our appearance. "I have great confidence in these horses," he said. "They will do very well for the carriage while we are in the country." In the afternoon we were harnessed and put in the carriage and led round to the front of the house. We heard the rustling sound of silk as my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She was a tall, proud-looking woman. She did not seem pleased about something, but she said nothing and got into the carriage. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and content. The next day at 3 o'clock we were again at the door. We again heard the silk dress rustle, and the lady came down the steps. And she said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher." York got down and said very respectfully, "I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, and my lord said it would be safer to do it gradually." "Do as I say," she said. Day by day, hole by hole, our reins were shortened. At last, for several days, there was no more shortening, and I was ready to do my duty, though it was now a constant harass. One day my lady came down later than usual, and the silk rustled more than ever. "Drive to the Duchess of B.'s," she said, and then, after a pause, "When are you going to raise those horses' heads up, York?" York came to me first, while the groom stood at Ginger's head. He drew my head back and fixed the reins so tight that it was very painful. Then he went to Ginger, who was impatiently jerking her head up and down. She knew what was coming. She kicked right over the carriage pole and fell down after giving me a severe blow. York called out, "Unbuckle the black horse! Get the winch and unscrew the carriage pole!" The groom soon set me free from Ginger and the carriage, and led me to my box. I was much excited by what had happened, and ready to kick anybody who came near me. Soon Ginger was led in by 2 grooms, too. She was knocked about and bruised. When Lord W. learned what had happened, he got very much angry. He blamed York for giving way to his mistress. They never put Ginger into the carriage again, and one of the Lord W.'s younger sons said he would like to have her. He was sure she would make a good hunter. It is hard to describe what I suffered for 4 long months in my lady's carriage. I am quite sure that if it had lasted much longer, I would have lost either my health or my temper. Before that, I never knew what it was to foam at the mouth. Some people think it is good to see this and say, "What fine-spirited creatures!" But to foam at the mouth is unnatural for horses. It is a sure sign of discomfort. In my old home, I always knew that John and my master were my friends, but here, although I was well treated, I had no friends. York knew how I felt, but he took it as a matter that could not be helped, and did nothing to relieve me. Chapter 11. Early in the spring, Lord W. and part of his family went up to London, and took York with them. Ginger and I and some other horses were left at home for use, and the head groom was in charge. Lady Harriet was an invalid, and never went out in the carriage, and Lady Anne preferred riding on horseback with her brother or cousins. She was not only a perfect horsewoman, but a merry, gentle, and beautiful lady. She chose me for her horse, and named me Black Auster. I enjoyed these rides very much, sometimes with Ginger, sometimes with Lizzie. This Lizzie was almost a thoroughbred. She had a lively spirit, and was a big favorite with the gentlemen, but Ginger told me she was rather nervous. There was a gentleman there whose name was Blantyre. He always rode Lizzie, and praised her so much that one day Lady Anne ordered to put a side saddle on her, and the other saddle on me. When we came to the door, the gentleman seemed very uneasy. "How is this?" he said. "Are you tired of your Black Auster?" "Not at all," she replied, "but I am letting you ride him for once, and I will try your charming Lizzie. In size and appearance she is more like a lady's horse than my own favorite." "I advise you not to ride her," he said. "She is a charming creature, but she is too nervous for a lady. Believe me, she is not safe." "My dear cousin," said Lady Anne, laughing, "please do not worry about me. I have been a horsewoman ever since I was a baby. I have followed hounds many times, though I know you do not approve of ladies hunting. You gentlemen are so fond of this Lizzie that I want to try her." So he placed her carefully on the saddle, gave her reins gently into her hand, and then mounted me. Just as we were moving off, a footman came out with a slip of paper and message from Lady Harriet. She wanted them to ask a certain question at Dr. Ashley's and bring her the answer. The village was about a mile off, and the doctor's house was the last in it. Blantyre dismounted at the gate and was going to open the gate for Lady Anne, but she said, "I will wait for you here, and you can hand Auster's rein on the gate." "I will not be 5 minutes," he said. "Oh, don't worry. Lizzie and I shall not run away from you." He hung my rein on the gate. Lizzie was standing quietly by the side of the road with her back to me. My young mistress was sitting easily with a loose rein, humming a song. I listened to my rider's footsteps and heard how he knocked at the door. Just then appeared some cart horses and several young colts. A boy behind them was cracking a big whip. The colts were wild and playful, and one of them hit Lizzie's hind legs. I cannot say if it was the stupid cold or the loud cracking of the whip, but She gave a violent kick and broke into a gallop. It was so sudden that Lady Anne was almost unseated, but she soon recovered herself. I neighed for help. I neighed again and again, and soon Blantyre came running to the gate. He looked about and saw the flying figure already far away on the road. In an instant he sprang to the saddle. I needed no whip, no spur, for I was as eager as my rider. So we dashed after them. After a mile and a half, the road divided into two roads, and Ginger was out of sight. Which way had she turned? A woman was standing at her garden gate there. Blantyre shouted, "Which way?" "To the right," cried the woman. Then for a moment we caught sight of Ginger, but then she disappeared again. An old road mender was standing near a heap of stones. As we came nearer, he made a sign to speak. "To the common, sir. She had turned off there." I knew this common very well. It was for the most part very uneven ground, covered with heather and dark green bushes. There were also open spaces of fine short grass, the worst place I ever knew for a gallop. It was clear that the rough ground was lessening Lizzie's speed, and there was a chance that we might overtake her. About halfway across the heath there was a wide ditch, and the earth from the cutting was on the other side. Surely this would stop them. But no. Without even pausing, Lizzie took the leap, stumbled, and fell. Blantyre said to me, "Now, Auster, do your best." I gathered myself together, and with one leap cleared both the ditch and bank. My poor young mistress lay with her face to the ground. Blantyre kneeled down and called her name. There was no sound. He gently turned her face upward. It was white, and the eyes were closed. "Annie, dear Annie, do speak!" But there was no answer, so he looked wildly round him for help. Two men were cutting turf at a distance. They saw Lizzie running without a rider, and left their work to catch her. When they ran up to Blantyre, they asked what they could do. "Can you ride?" asked Blantyre. "Well, sir, I'm not much of a horseman," said one of them, "but I'll risk my neck for Lady Anne." "Then mount this horse, my friend, ride to the doctor's and ask him to come here as quickly as he can, and I shall stay here." "All right, sir, I'll do my best, and I pray God the dear young lady may open her eyes soon." There was a great deal of hurry and excitement after the news became known. They put me into my box, took the saddle and bridle off, and threw a cloth over me. Ginger was saddled and sent off in great haste for Lord George. It seemed a long time before Ginger came back. When we were left alone, she told me all she had seen. "I can't tell much," she said. "We galloped nearly all the way and got there just as the doctor rode up. There was a woman sitting on the ground with the lady's head in her lap. The doctor poured something into her mouth, but all that I heard was, 'She's not dead.' After a while they took her to the carriage, and we came home together. My master said to a gentleman who stopped him that no bones were broken, but that she had not spoken yet." 2 days after the accident, Blantyre paid me a visit. He patted me and praised me very much. From his conversation with Lord George, I learned that my young mistress was now out of danger and would soon be able to ride again. This was good news to me, and I looked forward to a happy life. Chapter 12. Now I shall tell you about Reuben Smith, who was left in charge of the stables when York went to London. He understood his business very well. He was gentle and very clever with horses. He could doctor them almost as well as a farrier, for he had lived 2 years with a veterinary surgeon. He was a perfect driver, a handsome man, a good scholar, and had very pleasant manners. Everybody liked him, especially the horses, but he had one great fault. He liked to drink. As a rule, he did not drink for weeks or months, but then he would break out and have a bout of it, as York called it, and be a disgrace to himself and a terror to his wife. However, he was so useful that 2 or 3 times York had hushed the matter up. But one night, when Reuben had to drive a party home from a ball, he was so drunk that he could not hold the reins, and a gentleman from the party mounted the box and drove the ladies home. After that, Reuben was fired. His poor wife and little children had to leave the pretty cottage by the park gate and look for another place to stay. But shortly before Ginger and I came, they took Smith back again. It was now early in April, and the family was expected home some time in May. Colonel Blantyre was to return to his regiment, and Smith was to drive him to the town. At the station, the colonel put some money into Smith's hand and said good-bye to him, and added, "Take care of your young mistress, Reuben, and keep Black Auster only for the lady." After that, Smith rode me to the White Lion and ordered the hostler to feed me well and have me ready for him at 4 o'clock. A nail in one of my front shoes was loose, but the hostler did not notice it till just about 4 o'clock. Smith did not come into the yard till 5, and then he said he should not leave till 6, as he had met with some old friends. The man then told him of the nail and asked if he should fix the shoe. "No," said Smith, "I shall do it when we get home." He spoke in a very loud voice. I thought it was very unlike him not to care about the shoe. He was usually very worried about loose nails in our shoes. He did not come at 6, nor 7, nor 8. It was nearly 9 o'clock when he came. He seemed in a very bad temper, and before we were out of town he began to gallop, giving me a sharp cut with his whip, though I was going at full speed. The moon had not yet risen, and it was very dark. The roads were very stony, so my shoe became looser and soon it came off. But Smith was too drunk to notice it. Beyond the turnpike was a long piece of road with large sharp stones over which no horse could be driven quickly without risk of danger. But my rider forced me to go still faster, and my shoeless foot suffered dreadfully. This could not go on. The pain was too great. I stumbled and fell on my both knees. Smith was flung off by my fall. I was going at a big speed, and he fell with great force. The moon was above the hedge, and I could see Smith lying a few yards away from me. He did not rise, and then there was a heavy groan. I could groan too, but horses bear their pain in silence. So I stood there and listened. One more heavy groan from Smith, but I could see no motion. I could do nothing for him, nor myself. But how I listened for the sound of horse, or wheels, or footsteps! That was a lonely road, and at this time of the night we might stay for hours before help came to us. I stood watching and listening. It was a calm, sweet April night. There were no sounds but a few low notes of a nightingale, and nothing moved but the white clouds near the moon and a brown owl over the hedge. It made me think of the summer nights long ago, when I used to lie beside my mother in the green pleasant meadow at Farmer's Grace. In the midnight, I heard a sound of a horse's feet at a great distance. As the sound came nearer, I was sure I could hear Ginger's step. A little nearer, and I could tell she was in the dog-cart. I neighed loudly, and was happy to hear an answering neigh from Ginger and some men's voices. They came slowly over the stones and stopped by the dark figure lying on the ground. One of the men said, "It is Reuben, and he doesn't stir." The other man bent over him. "He is dead," he said. "Feel how cold his hands are." They raised him up, but there was no life, and his hair was soaked with blood. They laid him down again, and came and looked at me. They soon saw my cut knees. "The horse has been down and thrown him. Nobody thought the black horse could fall. Reuben has been lying here for hours. It is odd the horse hasn't moved from the place." Then Robert, that was the man's name, tried to lead me forward. I made a step, but almost fell again. "Just think of his riding a horse over these stones without a shoe," he said. "I'm afraid he was drunk again. Poor Susan! She looked awfully pale when she came to my house to ask about him. She begged me to go and meet him. But what can we do? We must get the horse home as well as the body, and that will not be easy to do." Then they agreed that Robert, as the groom, should lead me, and that Ned must take the body. Ned started off very slowly with his sad load, and Robert came and looked at my foot again. Then he took his handkerchief and bound it closely round, and so he led me home. I shall never forget that night walk. I limped on with great pain. I'm sure Robert was sorry for me. He often patted and encouraged me, talking to me in a pleasant voice. At last I reached my own box and had some corn. After that, Robert wrapped up my knees in wet cloths and took care of my foot. And before the horse doctor saw it in the morning, I managed to get myself down on the straw and slept in spite of the pain. The next day the horse doctor examined my wounds. I believe they did the best to make a good cure, but it was a long and painful one. As Smith's death was so sudden and no one was there to see it, they held an inquest. The landlord and hostler at the White Lion, as well as several other people, gave evidence that Smith was drunk when he started from the inn. My shoe was picked up among the stones, so I was cleared of all blame. Everybody pitied Susan. She was nearly out of her mind. She kept saying over and over again, "Oh, he was so good, so good! It was all that cursed drink. Why will they sell that cursed drink? Oh, Reuben, Reuben!" After he was buried, as she had no home or relations, she with her 6 little children left the pleasant home by the tall oak trees and went into that big, gloomy Union house. Chapter 13. As soon as my knees were better, they placed me into a small meadow for a month or 2. No other creature was there. I enjoyed the liberty and the sweet grass, but I felt very lonely. Ginger and I were big friends, and now I missed her company very much. I often neighed when I heard horses' feet passing on the road, but I seldom got an answer, till one morning the gate opened and dear old Ginger came in. With a joyful whinny I trotted up to her. We were both glad to meet, but I soon found out that she was brought to be with me not for our pleasure. Her story was too long to tell, but the end of it was that she was ruined by hard riding. Lord George was young, and he was a hard rider. He hunted whenever he had a chance, and never cared about his horse. Soon after I left the stable, there was a steeplechase, and he decided to ride. The groom told him that Ginger was not ready for the race, but he did not believe it. And on the day of the race he forced Ginger to run as fast as the foremost riders. With her high spirit she came in with the first 3 horses, but Lord George was too heavy for her, and her back was strained. And she said to me, "So, here we are, ruined in the prime of our youth and strength. You by a drunkard, and I by a fool. It is very hard for both of us." However, that did not spoil the pleasure we had in each other's company. We did not gallop about as we once did, but we used to feed and lie down together, and stand for hours under one of the shady lime trees with our heads close to each other. And so we passed our time till the family returned from town. One day we saw the Earl come into the meadow, and York was with him. They examined us carefully. The Earl seemed much annoyed. My old friend thought that these horses would find a good home with me, and now they are ruined. The mare shall have a 12-months run, and we shall see what that will do for her, but the black one must be sold. It is a pity, but I cannot have a horse with knees like these in my stables." "Of course not, my lord," said York, "but probably he will get a place where appearance is not important. I know a man in Bath who often wants a good horse at a low price. I know he looks well after his horses. Then write to him, York." After this they left us. "They'll soon take you away," said Ginger, "and I shall lose the only friend I have, and most likely we shall never see each other again. This is a hard world." About a week after this, Robert came into the field and led me away. Ginger called to me as long as she could hear the sound of my feet. Through the recommendation of York, I was bought by the master of the livery stables. I had to go there by train, which was new to me. When I reached the end of my journey, I found myself in a comfortable stable and well attended to. These stables were not so airy and pleasant as those I had been used to. I was well fed and well cleaned, and, on the whole, I think our master took as much care of us as he could. He kept a good many horses and carriages of different kinds for hire. So far I had always been driven by people who knew how to drive, but in this place I was to get experience of bed driving, for I was a job horse, and all sorts of people wished to hire me. As I was good-tempered and gentle, I was more often let out to the ignorant drivers than other horses. I will mention just a few styles in which they drove me. First, they were tight-rein drivers. They thought that all depended on holding the reins as hard as they could, never giving a horse the liberty of movement. Then there are loose-rein drivers, who let the reins lie easily on our backs, and their own hand rest lazily on their knees. Such gentlemen have no control over a horse if anything suddenly happens. If a horse starts or stumbles, they are nowhere and cannot help the horse or themselves till the mischief is done. Besides, a careless way of driving gets a horse into bad and often lazy habits. Squire Gordon always kept us to our best paces and our best manners. He said that spoiling a horse and letting him get into bad habits was just as cruel as spoiling a child, and both had to suffer for it afterwards. Then there is the steam engine style of driving. These drivers were mostly people from towns, who never had a horse of their own and generally traveled by rail. They seemed to think that a horse was something like a steam engine, only smaller. At any rate, they think that if only they pay for it, a horse must go just as far and just as fast, and with just as heavy a load as they please. These people never think of getting out to walk up a steep hill. Oh no, they have paid to ride, and ride they will. The horse? Oh, he's used to it. Walk? A good joke indeed. And so the whip and rein are used, and a cruel voice cries out, "Go along, you lazy beast!" And then comes another slash of the whip, though we are doing our very best to get along, uncomplaining and obedient. We get tired of this steam engine style of driving faster than of any other one. Then these cockneys, instead of starting at an easy pace, generally set off at full speed from the very stable yard. I remember one spring evening I and Rory were out for the day. Rory was the horse that went with me when they needed a pair. He was a good, honest fellow. We had our own driver, who was always caring and gentle with us. And so we had a very pleasant day. We were coming home at a good pace about twilight. As we neared the corner, I heard a horse and two wheels coming rapidly down the hill towards us. Happily for me, I was on the side next to the hedge. Rory was on the left side of the pole and had not even a shaft to protect him. The man who was driving was making straight for the corner, and he had no time to pull over to his own side, and he hit Rory really badly. It turned out that the other horse was from our own stables. The driver was one of those ignorant fellows who don't even know which is their own side of the road, or if they know, they don't care, and Rory's flesh was torn open and bleeding. It was a long time before the wound healed, and then he was sold for coal carting. After Rory was disabled, I often went in the carriage with a mare named Peggy, who stood in the next stall to mine. She was a strong, well-made animal with a dark brown mane and tail. There was no high breeding about her, but she was very pretty and remarkably sweet-tempered and willing. Still, there was an anxious look about her eye, by which I knew that she had some trouble. The first time we went out together, I thought she had a very odd pace. She seemed to go partly a trot, partly a canter, 3 or 4 paces, and then a little jump forward. "Ah," she said in a troubled manner, "I know my paces are very bad, but what can I do? It is not my fault. It is just because my legs are so short. Of course you can take a much longer step and go much faster. You see, I did not make myself. All my troubles come from my short legs," said Peggy. "But how is it," I said, "when you are so strong and good-tempered and willing?" "You see," said she, "men like to go so fast, and if I cannot go as fast as other horses, it is nothing but whip, whip, whip all the time. It was not always so. When I lived with my first master, I always went a good regular trot. He was a good and kind master. He was a young clergyman in the country. He had a lot of work, as he had 2 churches a good way apart. He never scolded or whipped me for not going faster. He was very fond of me. How I wish I was with him now! But he went to a large town, and I was sold to a farmer." Poor Peggy! I was very sorry for her, and I could not comfort her. I knew how hard it was for slow horses to be put with fast ones. She was often used in the phaeton, and some of the ladies liked her very much. She was so gentle. Some time after this, she was sold to two ladies who drove themselves and wanted a safe and good horse. I met her several times out in the country. I was very glad to see her, for she deserved a good place. After she left us, another horse came instead of her. He was young and very shy. I asked him why he was so shy. "Well, I hardly know," he said. "When I was young I was frightened several times, and if I saw anything strange I used to turn and look at it. Then my master always gave me a whipping, which made me start on and did not make me less afraid. One day an old gentleman was riding with him, and a large piece of white paper or rag blew just in front of me. I shied and started forward. My master, as usual, whipped me with great force. But the old man cried out, 'You are wrong! You are wrong! You should never whip a horse for shying. He shies because he is frightened, and you only frighten him more and make the habit worse.' I knew what my companion said was true, and I wished that every young horse had as good masters as Farmer Gray and Squire Gordon. Of course, sometimes we had good driving here. One day a gentleman came to drive me. I can remember now how quietly he turned me round, and then with a light feel of the rein and drawing the whip gently across my back, we went off. I arched my neck and set off at my best pace. I had someone behind me who knew how a good horse ought to be driven. It seemed like old times again, and made me feel quite gay. This gentleman took a great liking to me, and after trying me several times with the saddle, he asked my master to sell me to a friend of his, who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. And so, in the summer, I was sold to Mr. Barry. Chapter 14. My new master was an unmarried man. He lived at Bath. His doctor advised him to take horse exercise, and so he bought me. He hired a stable near lodgings and hired a man named Filcher as groom. My master knew very little about horses, but he treated me well. For a few days all went on well. My groom knew his business. He kept the stable clean and airy. He groomed me thoroughly and was always gentle. After a while, it seemed to me that I did not get enough oats. In 2 or 3 weeks, this began to tell upon my strength and spirits. However, I could not complain and make them know my wants. So it went on for about 2 months. But my master did not see that something was wrong. However, one afternoon he rode into the country to see a friend of his, a farmer who lived on the road to Wells. This gentleman had a very quick eye for horses, and he said, looking at me, "It seems to me, Barry, that your horse does not look so well as he did when you first had him. Is he well?" "Yes, I believe so," said my master, "but he is not so lively as he was. My groom tells me that horses are always dull and weak in autumn." "Autumn!" exclaimed the farmer. "It is only August, and with light work and good food he should not be weak like this. How do you feed him?" My master told him. The other shook his head slowly and began to feel me over. "I can't say who eats your corn, my dear fellow, but I think your horse doesn't get it. I advise you to look into your stable a little more. There are scoundrels mean enough to rob a dumb beast of his food. You must look into it." And then he turned to his man and said, "Give this horse a good portion of oats." "Dumb beasts? Yes, we are dumb beasts, but if I could speak, I would have told my master where his oats went to." My groom used to come here every morning about 6 o'clock with a little boy who always had a covered basket with him. He used to go with his father into the room where corn was kept, and when the door was open, I saw how he filled a little bag with oats and then went away. 5 or 6 mornings after this, the door was pushed open, and a policeman walked in, holding the child by the arm. He said, "Show me the place where your father keeps his rabbit's food." The boy looked very frightened and began to cry, but he led the way to the corn bin. Here the policeman found another empty bag like that which was found full of oats in the boy's basket. Filcher was cleaning my feet at the time, but the policeman took him and his boy to the lock-up. I heard afterwards that the boy was not found guilty, but the man was sentenced to prison for 2 months. In a few days my new groom came. He was a tall, good-looking fellow, but he was a humbug in the shape of a groom. His name was Alfred Smith. He did a great deal of stroking and patting when his master was there to see it. To make me look smart, he always brushed my mane and tail with water and my hoofs with oil before he brought me to the door. But he never cleaned my feet or took care of my shoes, or groomed me thoroughly, as if I were a cow, but not a horse. Alfred Smith thought he was very handsome. He spent a great deal of time on his hair, whiskers, and necktie before a little looking-glass in the harness room. When his master was speaking to him, it was always, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." But I should say he was the laziest, most conceited fellow I ever met. He did not abuse me, but a horse wants more than that. He never cleaned my box properly. He never took all the straw away, and the smell from what lay underneath was very bad. I did not feel the same appetite for my food. One day his master came in and said, "Alfred, this stable smells rather strong. Why don't you clean that stall and throw down plenty of water?" "Well, sir," he said, "I'll do so if you please, sir. But throwing down water in a horse's box is rather dangerous. The horse can catch a cold, sir. But I'll do it if you please, sir." "Well," said his master, "I should not like him to catch a cold, but I hate the smell of the stable. Do you think the drains are all right?" "Well, sir, now you mention it, I think the drain does sometimes send back a smell. There may be something wrong, sir." "Then send for the bricklayer," said his master. "Yes, sir, I will." The bricklayer came, and he put down some lime, and the master paid 5 shillings for that, and the smell in my box was as bad as ever. But that was not all. As I stood on some moist straw, my feet grew unhealthy and tender, and the master used to say, "I don't know what is the matter with this horse. He goes with difficulty. I'm sometimes afraid he will stumble." "Yes, sir," said Alfred. "I have noticed this myself when I exercised him." The fact was that he hardly ever exercised me, and when the master was busy I often stood for days without stretching my legs at all. But I was fed as if I were at hard work, and this did a lot of harm to my health. One day my feet became so tender that trotting over some fresh stones with my master on my back, I made 2 serious stumbles. And so as he came into the city, he stopped at the farrier's and asked him to see what was the matter with me. The man examined my feet one by one, and then he said, "Your horse has got the thrush, and his feet are very tender. I wonder why your groom has not taken care of it before. This is the sort of thing we find in stables where the litter is never properly cleaned out. If you send him here tomorrow, I will take care of the hoof, and I will tell your man how to apply the liniment which I will give him." The next day I had my feet thoroughly cleansed and stuffed with tow soaked in some strong lotion. The feeling was very unpleasant. The farrier gave the following instructions: all the litter should be taken out of my box day by day, and the floor kept very clean. With this treatment I soon regained my spirits. But Mr. Barry was so much upset. His grooms had deceived him twice. So he decided to give up keeping a horse and to hire when he wanted one. I was therefore kept till my feet were quite healthy, and then was sold again.